To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Cody Douglas had built his life like he built his construction empire, methodically, with precision and zero tolerance for structural weaknesses. At 42, his weathered hands bore the calluses of a man who'd climbed from poverty to owning the largest construction firm in Montana. His steel-gray eyes, which had intimidated countless business rivals, now softened only for two people, his 8-year-old daughter Emma and his wife of 12 years, Sherry. The Douglas family mansion sat on 50 acres outside Billings, a testament to Cody's rise from the trailer park where he'd grown up with an alcoholic father and absent mother. He'd sworn never to let his family experience the chaos of his childhood. Every decision, every business move, every carefully calculated risk had been made with Emma's future in mind. Sherry Douglas née Wagner had seemed perfect when they met at a charity gala 13 years ago. Beautiful, from an established family, with an education degree from the state university. She'd been working as an elementary school teacher then, claiming she wanted to make a difference. Cody had been immediately smitten by her apparent warmth and maternal instincts. She'd seemed like everything his own mother had never been. Their early years had been picture perfect. Sherry had quit teaching after Emma's birth, dedicating herself to being a full-time mother and socialite wife. She threw elaborate dinner parties, sat on charity boards, and maintained their social calendar with military precision. To the outside world, they were Montana's power couple. But Cody's construction background had taught him to recognize when foundations were shifting, even when the surface looked pristine. It started with small things. Sherry's increasing irritability with Emma's normal childhood messiness. Her obsession with maintaining a perfect house that felt more like a museum than a home. The way she'd snap at Emma for minor infractions, then shower her with expensive gifts as if buying forgiveness. Cody had attributed it to stress, to the pressures of their social position. He'd been wrong. Catastrophically wrong. The cracks in their foundation had been spreading for months, invisible to him because he'd been too busy building their empire to notice his family crumbling. But Sherry's mask was about to slip completely, and when it did, it would reveal a cruelty that would reshape Cody's understanding of everything he thought he knew about the woman he'd married. Emma's laughter echoed through the house that Tuesday evening as she practiced her violin in the music room. Cody smiled, loosening his tie as he entered their grand foyer. These moments, coming home to his daughter's joy, made every 18-hour workday worth it. He'd missed her recital practice last week due to a crisis at the new shopping center project, and he'd sworn not to let work interfere again. "Daddy!" Emma's voice rang out as she heard his footsteps. She appeared in the doorway, violin still tucked under her chin, bow poised midair. Her auburn hair, so like his own, caught the light from the crystal chandelier. "There's my little maestro," Cody said, setting down his briefcase and opening his arms. Emma carefully set down her instrument and ran to him. As he lifted her in a bear hug, he noticed Sherry watching from the top of the marble staircase, her expression unreadable. "How was your day, sunshine?" he asked Emma, setting her down but keeping his hands on her small shoulders. "Good. I learned a new song, and Mrs. Peterson said I'm ready for the advanced class. And guess what? Rachel Wynn invited me to her birthday party this weekend." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. We'll make sure to get her something special." Sherry descended the stairs slowly, her heels clicking against the marble with each measured step. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite being home all day. Everything about her appearance was immaculate, as always. "Cody, we need to discuss Emma's behavior today," Sherry said, her tone crisp and cold. Emma's face fell immediately. "Mommy, I said I was sorry. Children should be seen and not heard when adults are speaking." Sherry cut her off sharply. Cody frowned. This was new. Sherry had always been particular about manners, but this level of formality with their own daughter felt wrong. "What happened?" "Emma spilled juice on my dress this morning. My new Valentino dress. The one I was planning to wear to the governor's wife's luncheon tomorrow." "It was an accident, Mommy," Emma whispered, tears beginning to well in her eyes. "Accidents happen, Sherry," Cody said gently. "She's 8 years old." Sherry's eyes flashed with something dark. "You always take her side. Do you have any idea how much that dress cost? How important tomorrow's luncheon is for our social standing?" Cody studied his wife's face, seeing something he'd never noticed before, or perhaps had chosen not to see. There was a coldness in her blue eyes, a hardness around her mouth that spoke of deep-seated resentment. "It's just a dress," he said quietly. "Just a dress." Sherry's voice rose slightly. "Easy for you to say. You don't understand the pressures I face, the image I have to maintain. This family's reputation rests on my shoulders every single day." Emma began to back away toward the music room, sensing the tension between her parents. Cody wanted to follow her, to shield her from whatever this was becoming, but something in Sherry's demeanor kept him rooted in place. "Our reputation is built on more than designer clothes, Sherry." "Is it? Because from where I stand, it looks like I'm the one holding this family together while you disappear into your work 18 hours a day. I'm the one maintaining our social connections, our charitable commitments, our public image. And I can't do that if I'm constantly dealing with a clumsy child who doesn't respect." "Stop." Cody's voice carried the same authority that could silence a construction site full of rowdy workers. "Emma is our daughter, not an inconvenience to be managed." For a moment, Sherry looked genuinely surprised, as if she'd never considered that her words might be wrong. Then her expression shifted to something calculating. "Of course she's not an inconvenience. I'm just saying she needs to learn consequences. Structure. Discipline." The way she said discipline made something cold settle in Cody's chest. He'd grown up with an unpredictable father whose idea of discipline had left scars both visible and hidden. He'd sworn his daughter would never know that kind of fear. "We'll talk about this later," he said firmly. "Right now, I want to hear Emma play her new song." He turned toward the music room, but Sherry's voice stopped him. "Don't you dare walk away from me, Cody Douglas." He turned back slowly, his construction-hardened frame suddenly seeming larger in the elegant foyer. "Excuse me. You heard me. We're not done discussing this. Actually, we are." His voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath it. "Emma comes first. Always. If you have a problem with that, we'll address it after she's in bed." Sherry's perfect composure cracked slightly, revealing something ugly underneath. "You're making a mistake, coddling her like this. She needs to learn her place. Her place is as our loved and protected daughter. Full stop." Without another word, Cody walked to the music room, leaving Sherry standing alone in the foyer. He didn't see the look of pure rage that crossed her face, or the way her manicured fingers clenched into fists at her sides. If he had, he might have realized that the foundation of his family wasn't just cracking, it was about to collapse entirely. Chapter 2. The Serpent Revealed. The next morning arrived with the deceptive calm that often precedes catastrophe. Cody had left early for the construction site, troubled by the previous evening's confrontation, but hoping that time and perspective might heal whatever was fracturing between him and Sherry. He'd made a mental note to come home early, take Emma out for ice cream, and have a proper conversation with his wife about their family dynamics. He never got the chance. The call came at 2:47 p.m. while he was reviewing blueprints for the new medical center project. His phone displayed their home number, and he answered expecting Sherry's voice with some mundane household update. Instead, he heard Emma's screams. "Daddy! Daddy, help me!" His daughter's voice was raw with pain and terror, nearly drowned out by what sounded like chaos in the background. "Emma? Emma, what's wrong?" Cody shot to his feet, his blueprints scattering to the floor. "My arm. It burns. Daddy, it burns so bad." The line went dead. Cody's hands shook as he tried calling back. Busy signal. He tried again. Still busy. His mind raced through possibilities. Kitchen accident, electrical fire, hot water heater malfunction. But Emma's screams had contained something beyond physical pain. They'd held the kind of terror that spoke of betrayal, of safety shattered. He was in his truck and speeding home before his rational mind could even process what he might find there. The 30-minute drive took 18 minutes, his Ford F-350 pushing every speed limit as he called their home number repeatedly. No answer. The Douglas mansion looked serene from the outside, its manicured landscaping and elegant architecture giving no hint of the horror within. Cody burst through the front door, calling Emma's name. "In here." Sherry's voice came from the kitchen, strangely calm. Cody found them in the breakfast nook. Emma sat in a chair, her left arm submerged in a bowl of ice water, tears streaming silently down her face. The skin from her wrist to her elbow was an angry red, already beginning to blister. "Second-degree burns," unmistakably. Jesus Christ, Cody breathed, dropping to his knees beside his daughter. Baby, what happened? Emma looked up at him with eyes that held a new knowledge, an understanding that the world wasn't as safe as she'd believed. Mommy, she whispered, then looked fearfully toward Sherry. Sherry stood by the sink, still wearing her cream-colored morning outfit, completely composed. It was an accident, she said matter-of-factly. I was making tea, and Emma bumped into me while I was carrying the kettle. But Cody's trained eye caught details that contradicted her story. Sherry's clothes were pristine, no water stains, no signs of struggling with a hot kettle. The kitchen was immaculate except for the medical supplies scattered around Emma's makeshift treatment area. Most telling of all, the kettle sat cold and dry on the stove, clearly unused. Emma, Cody said gently, never taking his eyes off his daughter's face. Can you tell Daddy exactly what happened? Emma's gaze flicked between her parents. I spilled juice again. On Mommy's dress. I said sorry, but she got really mad. Her voice dropped to a whisper. She said kids need to be more careful. The words hit Cody like a physical blow. Not only did Emma's account contradict Sherry's story, but the phrasing, kids need to be more careful, sounded like something said during, not after, a punishment. Sherry. His voice was deadly quiet. Step outside with me. Now. Cody, you're overreacting. Children exaggerate when they're hurt. Outside. Now. Sherry's mask of concerned mother slipped slightly, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. But she followed him onto the back patio, closing the kitchen door behind them. Tell me what really happened, Cody said, his hands clenched at his sides. I already told you. It was an accident. Bullshit. The word came out like a gunshot. Emma's burns are consistent with deliberate contact, not splashing. The kettle hasn't been used. Your clothes are clean. And my daughter is terrified of you. Sherry's composed facade cracked completely. Your daughter is spoiled and clumsy and needed to learn a lesson about respecting other people's property. The admission hung in the air between them like poison gas. Cody stared at his wife, really stared at her, and saw a stranger. How long had this woman been hiding behind the mask of devoted mother and perfect wife? You deliberately burned our daughter. I taught her consequences. Something you've never been willing to do because you're too busy playing the hero, working all hours to prove you're not like your pathetic father. Don't. Cody's voice dropped to a whisper. Don't you dare bring my father into this. Why not? The truth is, you're exactly like him. Absent. Useless. Leaving me to handle everything while you chase your construction empire fantasy. I work to provide for this family. You work to avoid this family. Sherry's perfect composure finally shattered completely. Do you think I wanted this life? Stuck in Montana with a blue-collar husband who thinks money can buy class? I had opportunities, Cody. I could have married into real society, not this provincial playground you've built. Each word was a revelation, peeling back years of deception. Then why did you marry me? Because I thought you'd be grateful. I thought you'd worship me for choosing you over better options. I thought you'd give me everything I wanted and never question it. Her laugh was bitter and sharp. Instead, you obsess over that child and expect me to play happy little housewife in this gilded cage. That child is your daughter. That child is a reminder of everything I gave up. Every time I look at her, I see my youth disappearing, my options narrowing, my life becoming smaller and smaller. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The increasing irritability with Emma. The perfectionist demands that no 8-year-old could meet. The casual cruelties disguised as teaching moments. This hadn't been a momentary lapse in judgment. This was who Sherry really was, and Emma had been suffering for it. How long? Cody asked quietly. What? How long have you been hurting her? Sherry's eyes flicked away, and that told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't the first time. It was just the first time she'd left evidence. I want you to leave, he said. Excuse me. Pack your things. Get out of my house. I'll have divorce papers drawn up by the end of the week. Sherry laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think it's that simple? You think you can just discard me like one of your failed construction projects? I know things about your business, Cody. I know about the corners you've cut, the inspectors you've paid off, the safety violations you've covered up. I know where every body is buried in your precious empire. The threats rolled off her tongue too easily, too practiced. How long had she been preparing for this moment? And even if you could divorce me, she continued, What judge is going to give a blue-collar construction worker custody over an educated woman from an established family? Especially when that woman has such close ties to the community? Any judge who sees what you did to Emma. What I did? You mean the accident? The terrible, tragic accident that happened while I was heroically trying to treat my daughter's injuries from her own clumsiness. Cody stared at his wife, finally seeing the depth of her calculation. She'd planned this. Not just today's violence, but the entire framework for escaping consequences. She'd probably been building her defense for months, maybe years. "You're a monster," he said quietly. "I'm a survivor. Something you taught me, actually. You always said that in construction, you either build something strong enough to last, or it gets torn down. Well, I built something strong enough to last, Cody. The question is, are you strong enough to tear it down?" Behind the kitchen window, Emma watched her parents through the glass, still cradling her burned arm. She couldn't hear their words, but she could see the violence in their postures, the way her father's hands had curled into fists, the way her mother's smile had become something sharp and predatory. For the first time in her young life, Emma understood that monsters were real, and sometimes they wore the faces of people who were supposed to love you. Chapter 3. Allies in Shadow. That evening, after Emma had been treated at the hospital and was finally sleeping with her bandaged arm propped on pillows, Cody sat in his study staring at legal documents he couldn't focus on. The emergency room doctor had asked careful questions about the burns, her professional training clearly raising red flags. Cody had answered honestly, but Sherry's public performance had been flawless, the concerned mother devastated by her daughter's accident. The doctor had been required to file a report. Child Protective Services would investigate. But as Sherry had pointed out with venomous accuracy, investigations could be influenced, especially when one parent had deep community ties and the other was seen as an outsider who'd bought his way into high society. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. "Come in." The door opened to reveal Mark Murphy, Cody's best friend since childhood and the only person who knew the full story of his rise from poverty. Mark had built his own success as a private security consultant, his military background and investigative skills making him invaluable to clients who needed problems solved quietly. "Heard about Emma," Mark said simply, closing the door behind him. "How is she?" "Physically, she'll heal. Emotionally." Cody shook his head. "How did you hear?" "Hospital staff talk. Plus, Sherry's already been working the phones, getting ahead of the story." This wasn't surprising, but it still felt like another kick to the gut. While he'd been focused on Emma's care, Sherry had been managing their public image. "What's she saying?" Mark settled into the leather chair across from Cody's desk. "Tragic accident. Devoted mother beside herself with guilt. Implications that you've been working too much, leaving her to handle everything alone. Very subtle, very effective." She admitted it, Mark. "She deliberately burned Emma to teach her a lesson." "I believe you. But believing you and proving it are different things. Sherry's smart, and she's been planning this for longer than you know." Something in Mark's tone made Cody look up sharply. "What do you mean?" Mark was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with how much to reveal. "I've been watching your family for a while, Cody. Not officially, just keeping an eye on things. Something about Sherry always felt off to me. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you were happy. Or seemed to be. And I didn't have anything concrete, just instincts." Mark leaned forward. "But over the past 6 months, those instincts have been screaming. What have you seen?" "Sherry's been meeting with someone. Regularly. Twice a week at the Grandview Hotel downtown." The words hit Cody like a sledgehammer. "Who?" "Edward Burke. Sherry's old boyfriend from college. He moved back to Montana about 8 months ago, bought into the law firm of Henderson and Associates." Cody's mind reeled. Sherry had mentioned Edward exactly once, years ago, describing him as an old friend who'd chosen career over love by moving to Chicago after graduation. She'd painted herself as the heartbroken young woman who'd moved on to find true love with Cody. Another lie. Another carefully constructed piece of the perfect wife facade. "How long have you known?" "I confirmed it 3 weeks ago. I was going to tell you, but then this happened." Mark gestured toward the ceiling, where Emma slept. "Cody, I think they've been planning something bigger than just an affair." "What do you mean?" Mark pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos. "Edward Burke isn't just any lawyer. He specializes in high-asset divorces. His reputation is built on destroying wealthy husbands and leaving them with nothing. The photos showed Sherry and Edward at various locations, restaurants, his law office, a coffee shop. In every image, they looked like conspirators, heads bent together over documents, expressions serious and calculating. They're not just having an affair, Cody realized. They're planning my destruction. Gets worse. Burke's been quietly investigating your business practices. I have a source at the city planning office who says someone's been asking about your permits, your inspection records, your subcontractor relationships. Cody felt the room spinning slightly. Sherry told me she knew about corners I'd cut, safety violations I'd covered up. I thought she was bluffing. She wasn't. Burke's been building a case against you for months. The plan, as near as I can figure, is to divorce you, claim you're an unfit father due to your alleged business criminality, and walk away with Emma and most of your assets. And burning Emma? Probably wasn't part of the original plan. That felt like Sherry losing control, letting her mask slip. But now they'll use it as evidence of the stress you've put on the family, how your neglect forced her to handle everything alone until she cracked under pressure. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. While Cody had been working 18-hour days to build their future, Sherry had been methodically planning his destruction. Every charity event, every social function, every perfect wife performance had been a lie designed to position her for maximum advantage when she finally struck. There's more, Mark said quietly. Christ, what else? Emma's not their only target. I think Sherry's been poisoning her against you for months. Subtle stuff. Comments about how Daddy cares more about work than family, how Daddy's never around when she needs him, how Mommy has to handle everything because Daddy's too busy. The implications were staggering. Even if Cody could prove Sherry's abuse, even if he could expose her affair, the psychological damage might already be done. Emma might genuinely believe that her father was the problem, that her mother's cruelty was somehow justified by his failures. I need to know everything, Cody said finally. Every meeting, every document, every conversation they've had. Can you get me that? Mark smiled grimly. Already working on it. But Cody, if we're going to war with these people, we need to be smart about it. They've been planning this for months. We need to plan our response just as carefully. What are you suggesting? Let them think they're winning. Let Sherry believe her performance today was convincing. Let Burke think his investigation is secret. Meanwhile, we build our own case, not just to defend yourself, but to destroy them completely. Cody studied his friend's face, seeing something familiar there. It was the same cold calculation he'd seen in his own mirror when facing down business rivals who'd tried to undercut him. You have a plan. The beginning of one. But it's going to require you to be someone you've never been before. Someone who thinks 10 steps ahead, who can smile at enemies while planning their destruction, who can be patient enough to let his targets hang themselves. Someone like them. No, Mark said firmly. Someone better than them. Someone who can beat them at their own game and still sleep at night, because he's protecting his daughter from monsters. Cody thought about Emma, sleeping upstairs with burns on her arm and terror in her heart. He thought about Sherry's casual admission of deliberate cruelty. He thought about Edward Burke, a man he'd never met who'd been systematically planning his destruction for months. Most of all, he thought about his father, the drunk, angry man who'd failed to protect his family when it mattered most. Cody had spent his adult life trying to be different, to be better. But perhaps being better didn't mean being softer. Perhaps it meant being strong enough to do what was necessary, no matter the cost. Tell me about this plan, he said quietly. Mark's smile was sharp and predatory. First, we're going to need help. The kind of help that doesn't appear on official records. What kind of help? The kind that understands how to make powerful people disappear without actually making them disappear. I know someone who specializes in that particular art form. Who? Albert Crane. He used to be Army intelligence. Now he runs a private consulting firm that doesn't advertise and doesn't exist on paper. His clients include people who need problems solved quietly and permanently. Cody had heard whispers about men like Albert Crane, professionals who operated in the gray areas between legal and illegal, who could destroy lives with the same precision that Cody demolished buildings. And you trust him? With my life. More importantly, I trust him with Emma's life. The weight of the decision settled on Cody's shoulders. Once he crossed this line, there would be no going back. He would be committing to a path that might transform him into someone his daughter wouldn't recognize. But the alternative was letting monsters win. Letting them take Emma. letting them destroy everything he'd built while painting him as the villain. "Make the call," he said finally. Mark nodded and stood. "This isn't going to be quick, and it's not going to be clean. They've had months to prepare. We're going to need months to respond properly." "How long?" 6 months, maybe more. Long enough for them to get comfortable, to make mistakes, to reveal all their cards. Mark paused at the door. "Can you do that? Can you live with them, smile at them, play the perfect husband and father while we plan their destruction?" Cody thought about his daughter's screams, about Sherry's cold admission of deliberate cruelty, about Edward Burke building a case to steal his child. "I can do whatever it takes to protect Emma." "Good. Because Albert Crane doesn't do half measures. When we're done with Sherry and Burke, they won't just lose. They'll wish they'd never been born." As Mark left, Cody remained in his study, staring out at the Montana landscape he'd fought so hard to claim. Somewhere in the darkness, his enemies were probably celebrating their small victory, confident that they held all the cards. They had no idea what was coming for them. Chapter 4: The Gathering Storm. 3 weeks after Emma's accident, life in the Douglas household had settled into a deceptive normalcy. Sherry played the devoted mother recovering from a traumatic experience, doting on Emma with elaborate gifts and public displays of affection. To the outside world, she appeared to be a woman consumed by guilt over her daughter's injury, going above and beyond to make amends. Only Cody could see the calculation behind every gesture, the way Sherry's eyes would turn cold the moment no one else was watching. But he'd learned to hide his own thoughts behind a mask of weary acceptance, playing the part of a husband trying to hold his family together after a terrible accident. The performance was exhausting, but necessary. Mark's contact, Albert Crane, had been very specific about the importance of maintaining appearances while they gathered intelligence. "The moment they suspect you know the truth," Albert had explained in their first meeting, "they'll accelerate their timeline and possibly disappear entirely. Patience is the only weapon that matters right now." Albert Crane was not what Cody had expected. A soft-spoken man in his 50s with graying temples and wire-rimmed glasses, he looked more like a college professor than someone capable of destroying lives with surgical precision. But his eyes held the kind of cold intelligence that made predators step carefully, and his references, while unverifiable through conventional channels, spoke of problems solved for very powerful people. "Your wife and her lover have been planning this for 8 months, Albert had revealed during their second meeting, spreading photographs and documents across the table in his nondescript office. The affair started almost immediately after Burke returned to Montana, but this isn't a crime of passion, it's a business arrangement. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Burke's financial records showed payments from Sherry dating back 6 months, consulting fees for estate planning, that were clearly covers for something else. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, even apartment rentals for their meetings. They'd been careful, but not careful enough to evade someone with Albert's resources. "What exactly are they planning?" Cody had asked. "Complete destruction. Burke's investigation into your business practices has turned up several areas of vulnerability. Nothing criminal, but enough to create doubt about your character in a custody hearing. They're building a narrative of a workaholic husband who cuts corners professionally and neglects his family personally. And Sherry's role, the suffering wife who tried to hold everything together until the pressure broke her. Emma's injury plays perfectly into that narrative, the devoted mother who cracked under the strain of handling everything alone. The cold professionalism of their planning had been staggering. Every detail had been considered, every contingency planned for. They weren't just stealing his life. They were doing it with the kind of systematic thoroughness that Cody had to grudgingly respect. But respect and acceptance were different things entirely. "Can we stop them legally?" he'd asked. Albert's smile had been thin and humorless. "Legal solutions are for people who play by legal rules. Your wife and her lover are operating in gray areas where traditional law enforcement can't touch them. They need to be met with gray area solutions." Which brought them to tonight's meeting in a warehouse on the outskirts of Billings, where Albert was introducing Cody to the rest of his team. The building looked abandoned from the outside, but the interior had been converted into a sophisticated operations center. Banks of computers lined one wall, while another held detailed maps and photographs of Sherry and Burke's activities. 3 people waited inside, each representing a different aspect of Albert's capabilities. The first was a woman in her 30s with short black hair and the kind of athletic build that suggested military training. "This is Rachel Wynn," Albert said. "Electronic surveillance and data acquisition." Rachel nodded curtly. "I've been monitoring your wife's communications for the past week. She's careful, but she's also overconfident. They think they're smarter than they actually are." The second team member was a man about Cody's age with calloused hands and the weathered face of someone who spent time outdoors. Glenn Kelly. Physical surveillance and intimidation. "Intimidation?" Cody asked. Glenn's smile was unpleasant. "Sometimes people need encouragement to make bad decisions. I provide that encouragement." The third person surprised Cody most of all, an elderly woman with silver hair and grandmother appearance, wearing a floral dress that looked like it came from a church bazaar. "And this is Joyce Peck," Albert said. "Social engineering and psychological warfare." Joyce's smile was warm and grandmotherly, which somehow made it more disturbing than Glenn's predatory grin. "I make people trust me," she said simply. "Then I use that trust to destroy them from the inside." Cody looked around the room, taking in the scope of what Albert had assembled. This wasn't just surveillance. This was a military-grade operation designed to systematically dismantle his enemies' lives. "What exactly are you planning to do to them?" "That depends," Albert said, "on how far you're willing to go. We can expose their affair, destroy Burke's legal career, and ensure Sherry loses custody of Emma. That's the minimal approach. And the maximal approach?" Albert's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Total destruction. We don't just beat them. We make them disappear from any position where they could ever threaten you or Emma again. They lose everything, everyone they care about, every chance they have of rebuilding their lives." "What does that mean, practically?" Joyce answered, her grandmother voice making the words even more chilling. "It means Burke's law firm discovers irregularities in his billing practices. His marriage falls apart when his wife learns about his affair with detailed evidence. His children refuse to speak to him. His professional reputation is destroyed so thoroughly that he can't get hired as a public defender in a small town." Rachel picked up the narrative. "It means Sherry's family discovers that she's been embezzling from her charity work. Her social circle turns against her when they learn about her affair and her abuse of Emma. Every friend she has, every connection she's built, every relationship she's cultivated, all of it disappears." Glenn's contribution was the most direct. "And if they try to fight back, if they try to hurt Emma or threaten you again, they discover that their new circumstances make them very vulnerable to very unpleasant people." The room fell silent as Cody processed what they were offering. This wasn't just revenge, this was annihilation. Complete and systematic destruction of everything his enemies had built. "There's no coming back from this path," Albert said quietly. "Once we start, we finish. No mercy, no second chances, no forgiveness. Are you prepared for that?" Cody thought about Emma, asleep in her bed with bandages on her arm and new fear in her eyes. He thought about Sherry's cold admission of deliberate cruelty. He thought about Burke, a man who'd never met Emma but was perfectly willing to destroy her father to satisfy his own greed. "Emma is the only thing that matters," he said finally. "Everything else is just collateral damage." Albert nodded slowly. "Then we move to phase 2. Joyce will infiltrate Sherry's social circle and begin planting seeds of doubt about her character. Rachel will escalate surveillance and begin documenting everything they do. Glenn will start making Burke's life just uncomfortable enough to increase his stress without raising suspicion. And me? You keep playing the devoted husband. Let them think they're winning. Let them get overconfident and sloppy. When people think they're about to win everything, they tend to reveal more than they should." "How long?" "Another month, maybe 2. Long enough for them to commit to their plan so completely that they can't back out when things start going wrong." Cody looked around the room one more time, studying the faces of the people who would help him protect his daughter. They weren't good people, in any conventional sense. They were weapons, designed to destroy other humans with ruthless efficiency. But sometimes, he realized, protecting innocence required unleashing monsters. "Do it," he said simply. Albert's smile was cold and satisfied. "Consider it done. Your wife and her lover have no idea what storm they've awakened." As Cody left the warehouse and drove home through the Montana night, he wondered if Emma would recognize the man he was becoming. Then he thought about her burns, her tears, her new understanding that the world contained people who would hurt children for their own satisfaction. Maybe recognition didn't matter. Maybe all that mattered was making sure she never had to learn that lesson again. Chapter 5. The Trap Tightens. 2 months into Albert's operation, the first cracks began to show in Sherry and Burke's perfect plan. It started small, a computer virus that corrupted some of Burke's files, requiring him to recreate weeks of work. A scheduling conflict that caused him to miss an important client meeting. Little things that could be attributed to bad luck or stress. Meanwhile, Joyce Peck had worked her way into Sherry's inner circle with stunning efficiency. Posing as a wealthy widow new to Billings, she joined the same charity boards and social clubs that Sherry frequented. Within weeks, she'd become Sherry's confidant, the sympathetic ear who understood the pressures of maintaining a perfect facade. "Your husband seems so devoted to his work," Joyce would say during their coffee meetings, her voice full of grandmotherly concern. "It must be exhausting, handling everything at home while he builds his empire. I can be whatever I need to be to protect Emma." Good. Because once we spring this trap, there's no going back. They'll either destroy themselves trying to capitalize on your apparent weakness, or they'll realize they're being manipulated and disappear. And if they disappear? Albert's smile was cold and final. Then Glenn and I will have to have very serious conversations with them about the importance of keeping their distance from your family. As the meeting broke up and the team dispersed to their various tasks, Cody remained behind to study the photographs and documents that covered the conference table. Evidence of his wife's betrayal, his enemy's predation, his daughter's endangerment. All of it carefully organized and annotated by people who destroyed human lives with the same methodical precision that he used to construct buildings. In 2 weeks, the trap would be set. Sherry and Burke would see what they thought was their moment of triumph, their chance to claim everything they'd been planning to steal. They had no idea that their victory would be the first step toward their complete annihilation. Chapter 6. The Perfect Storm. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning when Glenn's carefully orchestrated thefts hit 3 of Cody's construction sites simultaneously. 2 excavators, a crane, and nearly $50,000 worth of copper piping and electrical equipment disappeared overnight, leaving behind evidence of professional operation but no usable leads. Cody's reaction had to be carefully calibrated, upset enough to seem genuinely distressed, but not so controlled that it appeared suspicious. He stormed around the sites, shouted at his foreman, and made several heated phone calls that anyone nearby could overhear. "This is going to set us back weeks," he told his project manager, his voice carrying the right note of barely controlled panic. "The insurance will investigate for months before they pay out, and we can't afford to stop work that long." By noon, the story was circulating through Billings' business community. Cody Douglas, the construction king who'd never had a major setback, was facing his first real crisis. Equipment stolen, projects delayed, cash flow disrupted. The rumors reached Sherry before Cody arrived home that evening. He found her in the kitchen, her expression carefully arranged in concerned wife mode, but he could see the excitement underneath. This was the opportunity she'd been waiting for, her husband's moment of vulnerability. "I heard about the thefts," she said, moving to embrace him. "I'm so sorry, honey. Are you okay?" The embrace felt like being hugged by a snake, but Cody forced himself to return it. "It's bad, Sherry. Really bad. The timing couldn't be worse." "What do you mean?" "The Henderson Medical Center project is behind schedule already. If I can't get replacement equipment fast, I'll miss my deadline and forfeit the performance bond. That's $2 million I don't have right now." This was carefully calculated misinformation. The medical center project was actually ahead of schedule, and Cody's financial position was stronger than it had ever been. But Sherry didn't need to know that. $2 million. Her voice carried just the right note of shock. "Cody, what does that mean for us?" "I don't know yet. I need to talk to the bank tomorrow, see if I can extend our credit line. Maybe take out a second mortgage on the house." He watched Sherry's face carefully, seeing the calculations running behind her eyes. A financially desperate husband would be much easier to destroy in divorce proceedings than a wealthy one. If Cody was forced to mortgage their assets to cover business losses, those assets would be vulnerable to division in court. "I'm sure it will work out," she said, but her smile was predatory. "You've always found a way to solve problems before." That evening, Joyce reported that Sherry had called an emergency meeting with Burke for the next day. They were accelerating their timeline, just as Albert had predicted. Meanwhile, Rachel had been busy planting evidence of financial irregularities in Burke's law firm computers. Not enough to trigger immediate investigation, but enough to create a trail that would be discovered when the right people started looking. Bank transfers to accounts Burke didn't officially control. Billing irregularities that suggested client fund misappropriation. Email communications that implied inappropriate relationships with clients' wives. The beauty of Rachel's work was its subtlety. To casual observation, Burke appeared to be successful and ethical. But anyone conducting a detailed investigation would find a pattern of questionable behavior stretching back months. Glenn had also been busy, applying pressure to Burke's gambling associates in ways that made his debts more urgent without revealing their source. Burke's weekly poker game had become significantly more expensive, and his luck had turned notably bad. The underground casino where he played had suddenly become more aggressive about collecting outstanding debts. Within 48 hours of the equipment thefts, Burke was facing financial pressures from multiple directions, just as his greatest opportunity for profit was materializing. The trap was working perfectly. On Thursday evening, Cody arrived home to find Sherry entertaining a guest in their living room. The man was about Cody's age, well-dressed, but with the kind of artificial polish that suggested new money trying to appear established. His handshake was firm but slightly too long, his smile too practiced. "Cody, I'd like you to meet Edward Burke," Sherry said. "He's the lawyer who helped us with Emma's medical paperwork. I thought you might want to talk to him about your business situation." The introduction was masterfully done. Sherry appeared to be helping her husband by connecting him with legal expertise, while actually delivering him directly to his enemy. Burke could evaluate Cody's vulnerability firsthand while appearing to offer assistance. "I've heard about your recent troubles," Burke said, his voice full of professional sympathy. "These kinds of setbacks can be devastating if they're not handled properly." Cody forced himself to play the desperate businessman, accepting Burke's offer to discuss options over dinner. The three of them sat in the Douglas family dining room, the room where Emma had once practiced violin, where Cody had dreamed of family dinners filled with laughter, while his enemies planned his destruction. Burke was good at his job. He asked probing questions about Cody's financial position, his insurance coverage, his business relationships, all under the guise of offering legal advice, but actually gathering intelligence for the custody battle he was planning to orchestrate. "The construction industry can be unforgiving," Burke said over dessert. "One major setback can cascade into total failure if a man doesn't have strong support systems." The psychological manipulation was surgical in its precision. Joyce never directly criticized Cody or encouraged Sherry's infidelity. Instead, she simply listened and asked innocent questions that led Sherry to justify her actions to herself. "Sometimes I wonder if he really sees me," Sherry had confided during one of these sessions, unaware that Joyce was recording every word. "Or if I'm just another acquisition, like his businesses. And yet you've been so strong through Emma's accident," Joyce would respond. Not every woman could have handled that kind of trauma with such grace. The recordings were devastating. Hour after hour of Sherry revealing her true thoughts about Emma, about Cody, about the life she felt trapped in. The devoted mother mask slipped completely when she thought she was speaking to a sympathetic friend. "Honestly, sometimes I look at Emma and I see all my lost opportunities," Sherry had said during one particularly damaging session. "I could have been so much more than a construction worker's wife stuck in Montana." But the most damaging revelation came when Joyce had carefully steered the conversation toward Burke. "That lawyer who helped you with Emma's medical paperwork seems very competent," Joyce had mentioned casually. Sherry's response had been everything Albert could have hoped for. "Edward's brilliant. We have such a connection, you know. He understands me in ways Cody never could. He sees the woman I really am, not just the role I've been playing. It must be wonderful to have someone who truly appreciates you." "It is. And soon, we won't have to hide anymore. Edward's been working on something that will give us the freedom to be together properly." Oh, the conversation that followed laid out their entire plan in Sherry's own words. The affair, the custody strategy, the business investigation, even their timeline for filing divorce papers. All of it recorded in high-definition audio that would destroy them both in any courtroom. But Albert wasn't planning to use traditional courtrooms. While Joyce worked on Sherry, Rachel had been systematically penetrating Burke's digital life. His law firm's security was adequate against typical hackers, but Rachel was far from typical. Within days, she'd accessed his email, his financial records, his client files, and his personal communications. What she found exceeded even Albert's expectations. Burke wasn't just planning to destroy Cody. He'd done this before. His client list included 3 other wealthy men who'd been devastated in divorce proceedings over the past 2 years. In each case, Burke had developed relationships with their wives months before the marriages fell apart, coached them through strategic affairs, and helped them claim the maximum possible assets through carefully orchestrated custody battles. He's a serial predator, Rachel explained during their team meeting. This is his business model. He identifies wealthy men with attractive wives, seduces the wives, then destroys the husbands financially and emotionally. How many victims? Albert asked. At least 7 that I can identify. Probably more. He's very good at covering his tracks, but he's also arrogant. He keeps detailed records of his conquests, including recordings of private conversations with his targets. The recordings Rachel had found were sickening. Burke discussing his victims like hunting trophies, rating their wives on attractiveness and manipulability, calculating the financial benefits of each destroyed marriage. In one particularly damning conversation with a colleague, he'd referred to Emma as collateral damage and speculated about how quickly he could convince Sherry to send her to boarding school once they had custody. This changes everything, Cody said after reviewing the evidence. We're not just dealing with an affair. We're dealing with a predator who's made a career of destroying families. Albert nodded grimly. Which means we can't just stop him. We have to make sure he never has the opportunity to hurt another family. Glenn had been handling the physical intimidation aspect of their operation, and his reports were equally illuminating. Burke lived alone in an expensive downtown apartment, drove a leased BMW, and maintained a lifestyle that was just slightly beyond what his legitimate income could support. He was careful about his personal security, but not paranoid, suggesting that he'd never faced serious opposition before. He thinks he's untouchable, Glenn reported. Acts like he owns the city. But he's got weaknesses. Gambling problem, for one. Likes the underground poker games in the warehouse district. Also has a thing for expensive escorts. Imports them from Denver and Seattle. Blackmail material? Better than that. Financial vulnerability. His gambling debts are substantial, and he's been using client funds to cover them. Not enough to trigger an audit, but enough to destroy him if it comes to light. The picture that emerged was of a man who'd become overconfident in his predatory success. Burke had been winning for so long that he'd stopped considering the possibility of losing, and that carelessness was about to become his downfall. What's our next move? Cody asked. Albert spread out a timeline on the conference table. Joyce continues building trust with Sherry while collecting more incriminating evidence. Rachel accelerates her infiltration of Burke's systems and begins planting evidence of his financial irregularities where his law firm partners will eventually find it. Glenn starts putting pressure on Burke's gambling associates. Nothing obvious, just enough to make his debts more urgent. And me? You prepare for the performance of your life. Because in 2 weeks, we're going to give them exactly what they think they want, the perfect opportunity to destroy you. Albert's plan was audacious in its simplicity. They would stage a scenario that made Cody appear vulnerable and desperate, encouraging Sherry and Burke to accelerate their timeline and make mistakes. Sometimes the best way to catch predators was to let them think they'd found easy prey. What kind of scenario? A business crisis. Glenn will arrange for some very expensive equipment to be stolen from your construction sites. Rachel will plant evidence suggesting financial problems in your company records. Joyce will mention to Sherry that she's heard rumors about construction industry troubles. You want them to think I'm financially vulnerable. We want them to think you're desperate. Desperate people make bad decisions, and we need Burke and Sherry to make very bad decisions very publicly. The plan required Cody to play a role that went against every instinct he'd developed as a businessman. Instead of projecting strength and control, he'd have to appear weak and reactive. Instead of solving problems quickly and efficiently, he'd have to seem overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his control. Can you do that? Albert asked. Can you let them think they're winning, even when you know we're setting them up? Cody thought about the recordings of Burke discussing Emma as collateral damage. He thought about Sherry's casual cruelty and calculated manipulation. He thought about his daughter, who still flinched when her mother raised her voice. I'm lucky to have Sherry, Cody replied, watching his wife's face. She's been holding everything together while I deal with this crisis. Family support is crucial, Burke agreed, especially when children are involved. They need stability, consistency. They need to know their world is secure. The implied threat was clear. Emma's security depended on Cody's ability to provide stability, and that ability was apparently failing. Burke was already laying the groundwork for painting Cody as an unfit father whose business failures made him unable to care for his daughter properly. After Burke left, Sherry was particularly affectionate, playing the supportive wife role with Academy Award-worthy performance. As she offered to cut household expenses, suggested they might need to consider downsizing their lifestyle, even volunteered to return to work if necessary. All of it calculated to make Cody feel grateful for her support while actually documenting his financial weakness for future legal proceedings. But Cody had one more card to play in their psychological warfare. "There's something else," he said as they prepared for bed. "Something I haven't told you about the investigation." Sherry's interest was immediate and intense. "What do you mean?" "The police think the thefts might be connected to someone with inside knowledge of my operations. Someone who knew which sites would be most vulnerable, when security would be lightest." He watched Sherry's face carefully, seeing a flicker of genuine alarm. She'd been so focused on Burke's legal strategy that she might not have considered whether their plan could leave them vulnerable to criminal charges. Inside knowledge? Like who? They're not sure yet. Could be an employee, could be a competitor, could be someone with access to my schedules and financial information. He paused meaningfully. They want to interview family members, just to eliminate them from consideration. This was pure psychological manipulation. There was no police investigation into inside involvement, because the thefts had been orchestrated by Albert's team. But Sherry didn't know that, and the suggestion that she might become a suspect in her husband's troubles clearly rattled her. "They want to interview me? Just routine questions. They'll probably ask about anyone I've discussed business with, anyone who might have access to our home office, that kind of thing." Sherry's mind was clearly racing, calculating whether her meetings with Burke could somehow be connected to the thefts. It was a perfect example of how guilty consciences could turn innocent situations into sources of paranoia. That night, as Sherry lay beside him pretending to sleep, Cody stared at the ceiling and thought about the elaborate performance they were all maintaining. His wife was lying to him while pretending to support him. Her lover was planning to destroy him while pretending to help him. He was pretending to be vulnerable while actually orchestrating their downfall. In the middle of it all was Emma, innocent and unaware of the war being fought around her. She'd noticed the tension between her parents, the way conversations stopped when she entered rooms, the way her mother's smiles had become increasingly forced. Tomorrow, Albert would begin the final phase of their operation. Sherry and Burke had taken the bait, accelerated their timeline, and committed themselves to a course of action that would lead to their destruction. The trap was set. The prey had entered willingly. All that remained was to spring the mechanism and watch their enemies destroy themselves. But tonight, lying in bed next to the woman who'd betrayed him so completely, Cody felt the weight of what he was becoming. The man Emma had known as her father was disappearing, replaced by someone capable of orchestrating elaborate deceptions and systematic revenge. He wondered if, when this was all over, there would be enough of the original Cody Douglas left to be the father his daughter needed. Then he thought about her burns, her tears, her new fear of the woman who was supposed to protect her, and he pushed aside all doubts. Emma's safety was worth any sacrifice, including the sacrifice of his own soul. Chapter 7. The Reckoning begins. The end came faster than anyone expected, triggered by Sherry's impatience and Burke's greed. On Friday morning, less than a week after their dinner meeting, Burke filed preliminary divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences and requesting emergency custody of Emma based on Cody's financial instability and inability to provide a secure environment. The filing was meant to be confidential, but Albert's sources in the courthouse ensured Cody knew about it within hours. The legal papers told a damning story, built on months of careful observation and deliberate manipulation. They painted Cody as a workaholic who prioritized business over family, a man whose financial recklessness had endangered his household stability. Most devastatingly, they suggested that Emma's accident had occurred because of inadequate supervision while Cody was dealing with business crises. Burke had turned Sherry's abuse of their daughter into evidence of Cody's failure as a father. The custody request included a motion for Emma to be temporarily placed with Sherry for her own protection, while the court evaluated Cody's fitness as a parent. If granted, it would give them exactly what they'd been planning. Emma in Sherry's custody, Cody fighting an uphill battle to see his own daughter. But Burke had made one critical error in his haste to capitalize on Cody's apparent weakness. He'd filed the papers without conducting proper due diligence on Cody's actual financial position, relying instead on rumors and appearances. The financial instability he'd cited was entirely fabricated, and any serious investigation would reveal that immediately. Albert's response was swift and merciless. Within 24 hours of the filing, Rachel's carefully planted evidence began surfacing in Burke's law firm. A routine audit triggered by a suspicious bank transfer found irregularities in client accounts. Email communications suggesting inappropriate relationships with clients' wives were accidentally copied to the firm's ethics committee. The gambling debts Glenn had been orchestrating suddenly came due, with Burke's creditors demanding immediate payment. When he couldn't produce the cash, they became very interested in his recent income sources, interest that led them to investigate his client relationships more carefully than anyone wanted. Meanwhile, Joyce's psychological manipulation of Sherry reached its climax with a series of recordings that captured her discussing the custody plan in explicit detail. Not just admitting to the affair, but laughing about her ability to manipulate both Cody and Burke, describing Emma as an asset to be leveraged in her divorce strategy. The recordings were devastating, but Albert's team had something even more damaging: video evidence of Sherry's abuse of Emma. Glenn had been conducting surveillance of the Douglas household for weeks, and his cameras had captured multiple instances of Sherry's cruelty when she thought no one was watching. Emma being shaken violently for minor infractions. Emma being locked in her room without dinner for disrespecting her mother. Emma cowering in fear as Sherry screamed at her for age-appropriate childhood behavior. Most damaging of all was footage from the day of the burning, captured by a camera Glenn had hidden in the kitchen weeks earlier. The recording showed Sherry deliberately heating water on the stove, waiting for Emma to spill juice on her dress, then calmly and methodically burning her daughter's arm, while explaining that kids need to be more careful. The premeditation was undeniable. This hadn't been a moment of lost control. It was calculated child abuse designed to teach a lesson through pain. But Albert's masterstroke came in how he chose to reveal all this evidence. Instead of simply turning it over to authorities, he orchestrated a campaign that would destroy Sherry and Burke's reputations so thoroughly that legal proceedings would be almost unnecessary. The evidence was leaked simultaneously to multiple sources: the State Bar Association, Child Protective Services, the local media, and every member of Sherry's social circle. Joyce, still playing the role of sympathetic friend, arranged for Sherry to host a charity luncheon at the Douglas mansion on the same day the revelations went public. The timing was exquisite. Sherry found herself surrounded by society ladies who'd just learned about her affair, her child abuse, and her conspiracy to destroy her husband, all while she was trying to play the role of devoted mother and wronged wife. The luncheon became a social execution. One by one, Sherry's guests found excuses to leave early, their disgust and horror barely concealed. Phone calls from board members stripped her of her charitable positions. Invitations to future events were quietly rescinded. Within hours, Sherry went from social queen to complete pariah, her carefully constructed image destroyed beyond any possibility of repair. Burke's destruction was even more spectacular. The Bar Association launched an immediate investigation into his client relationships and financial practices. His law firm partners, facing potential liability for his actions, moved quickly to distance themselves by suspending him pending investigation. But the most damaging blow came when his wife discovered not only his affair with Sherry, but his history of targeting vulnerable women for financial gain. The evidence Rachel had compiled showed a pattern of predatory behavior stretching back years, turning him from sympathetic wronged spouse into calculating monster in his wife's eyes. The divorce papers she filed made Burke's original petition against Cody look gentle by comparison. She demanded everything: their house, their assets, custody of their children, and massive alimony payments. More importantly, she hired the kind of aggressive attorney who specialized in destroying men who'd betrayed their families. Within a week, Burke went from successful lawyer planning Cody's destruction to unemployed predator fighting for his financial life. But Cody's revenge wasn't finished. The most devastating blow was yet to come. Emma's testimony would be the final nail in their coffins, but Albert insisted it be handled with surgical precision. They couldn't traumatize the child further by forcing her to relive her abuse in court. Instead, they arranged for her to speak with a child psychologist in a safe, comfortable environment, with the conversations being recorded for future legal proceedings. Dr. Ruth Dominguez was a specialist in child trauma, someone whose credentials and reputation were unassailable. Her sessions with Emma were conducted with Emma's grandmother present, Cody's mother, who'd flown in from Arizona the moment she learned what had happened. What emerged from those sessions was heartbreaking and infuriating in equal measure. Emma's abuse hadn't been limited to the burning incident. For months, Sherry had been systematically terrorizing her daughter with punishments that walked the line between discipline and cruelty. Emma had been afraid to tell her father because Sherry had convinced her that his work stress would make him sick if he knew how badly Emma was behaving. The 8-year-old had been protecting her father by enduring her mother's abuse in silence. She said, "Daddy works so hard for us, and if I was bad, it would make him too sad to keep working," Emma explained to Dr. Dominguez, her small voice barely audible on the recording. She said good daughters don't make their daddies worry. The psychological manipulation was as damaging as the physical abuse, designed to isolate Emma from the one person who could protect her. Sherry had turned their daughter's love for her father into a weapon against them both. When Cody heard the recordings, sitting in Albert's office surrounded by evidence of his enemy's destruction, he felt something break inside his chest. Not his resolve, that remained diamond hard, but his last lingering doubt about the morality of what they'd done. "They're finished," Albert said simply. "Burke will be disbarred and financially ruined. Sherry will lose all custody rights and face criminal charges. Neither of them will ever be in a position to threaten Emma again. What about the custody hearing? There won't be one. Burke's been suspended, so he can't represent Sherry. No other lawyer in the state will touch her case once they see the evidence. The court will award you full custody by default." Cody nodded, feeling something like satisfaction, but not quite. Sherry and Burke were getting exactly what they deserved, but their destruction couldn't undo Emma's trauma or restore the innocence they'd stolen from her. What happens now? Now you rebuild your life with your daughter. And Sherry and Burke learn what it feels like to lose everything they care about. Through the office window, Cody could see the Montana landscape stretching toward the horizon, vast and unforgiving. Somewhere out there, his enemies were discovering that their carefully laid plans had transformed into their complete annihilation. The trap had worked perfectly. The hunters had become the hunted, and the hunted had proven far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. But the real work was just beginning. Cody had won the war, but now he had to help his daughter heal from wounds that went deeper than any physical scar. The man who'd entered this conflict to protect his child had been forever changed by what he'd been forced to become. The question now was whether he could find his way back to being the father Emma needed, or whether the darkness required to defeat his enemies had consumed too much of who he used to be. Chapter 8. Ashes and Retribution. 3 months after the revelation, the trials began. Not in courtrooms. Those would come later. But in the court of public opinion, where Sherry and Burke discovered that their former lives had been completely erased. Sherry's family, the Wagners, who had once been so proud of their daughter's marriage into Montana's social elite, now refused to take her calls. Her parents, facing questions from their own social circle about how they'd raised such a daughter, issued a public statement disowning her actions and expressing their support for Emma's recovery. "We are horrified by the evidence of our daughter's behavior," the statement read. "No child should suffer what our granddaughter endured. We support Cody Douglas completely in his efforts to protect Emma and ensure she receives the help she needs." The statement was crafted by Albert's team, but the Wagners' signatures were genuine. Joyce had visited them personally, armed with the recordings and video evidence, and their horror at Sherry's actions was real and absolute. Burke's destruction was even more comprehensive. His wife's divorce attorney had discovered that he'd been using marital assets to fund his affairs and gambling debts for years. The house was gone, sold to pay creditors. His law license was suspended pending criminal investigation. His children, horrified by the evidence of his predatory behavior, had changed their names and refused all contact. But Albert's most elegant touch was ensuring that both Sherry and Burke learned exactly why their lives had collapsed. Joyce's final meeting with Sherry took place in the cramped apartment where she was now living, her designer clothes replaced by discount store purchases, her perfect manicure chipped and uneven. "I don't understand how this happened," Sherry said, her composure finally cracking completely. "Everything was going perfectly. We had the perfect plan." Joyce smiled with grandmotherly warmth. "Oh, my dear, you never had a plan. You had an illusion. And illusions tend to shatter when they encounter reality." "What do you mean?" "I mean that your husband knew about your affair for months. He knew about Burke's investigation, about your custody strategy, about everything you thought you were hiding." The color drained from Sherry's face. "That's impossible, is it? You never wondered why your plan fell apart so completely? Why evidence of your abuse appeared at exactly the wrong moment? Why Burke's financial problems became so urgent right when he needed to focus on your case?" Understanding dawned slowly, horror replacing confusion in Sherry's eyes. "Cody did this. He orchestrated all of it. Your husband is a very intelligent man who loves his daughter more than you ever loved anything in your entire life. Did you really think he'd just let you destroy her to satisfy your own selfishness?" Joyce stood to leave, her role in Sherry's life finally complete. "You should have remembered something about construction workers, dear. They know how to tear things down just as efficiently as they build them up." Burke received his revelation in a more direct manner. Glenn paid him a visit in the Fleabag Motel, where he was now living. Unable to afford anything better after his wife's attorney had frozen his assets. "Edward Burke," Glenn said, settling into the room's single chair while Burke cowered on the bed. "We need to talk. I don't know who you are, but if you're here about money, I'm here about understanding. You're a smart man, supposedly. Haven't you figured out yet what really happened to your life?" Burke's fear was palpable, but his arrogance remained intact. "I had some bad luck. Financial setbacks. It happens." Glenn laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Bad luck? Your entire destruction was planned and executed by professionals. Every setback you experienced was deliberately orchestrated." "That's impossible, is it? Let me walk you through it." Glenn pulled out a tablet and began showing Burke photographs, surveillance images of his meetings with Sherry, records of his financial transactions, documentation of every step in his plan to destroy Cody. "We've been watching you for months. We know about your history of targeting wealthy men through their wives. We know about your gambling debts, your client fund irregularities, your systematic destruction of families for profit." Burke's face went white as he realized the scope of what he was seeing. "Who are you?" "We're the people Cody Douglas hired to protect his daughter from predators like you. And we're very good at our job." Glenn leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Here's what's going to happen next. You're going to disappear from Montana. You're going to find somewhere far away from here and rebuild whatever pathetic existence you can manage. And you're never going to contact the Douglas family again. You can't threaten me. I'll call the police." "With what evidence? That someone warned you to stay away from the family you tried to destroy? That someone suggested you might be happier living somewhere else?" Glenn's smile was predatory. "Besides, after your upcoming criminal trial for client fund misappropriation, you'll probably want to be somewhere with fewer reminders of your former life anyway." The final blow came when Glenn showed Burke the video evidence of Sherry burning Emma. "This is what you were willing to help cover up for money. This is the woman you were planning to give custody of an 8-year-old child. Take a good look, Burke. This is who you chose to partner with." The video broke something in Burke that threats and financial ruin hadn't touched. Watching Sherry deliberately burn her daughter's arm, while explaining that kids need to be more careful, finally showed him the true nature of what he'd been planning to enable. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You didn't want to know. There's a difference." Glenn stood to leave. "You have 48 hours to be gone from Montana. If I see you here after that, our next conversation will be very different." Burke was gone within 24 hours, leaving behind only debts and destroyed relationships. He'd arrived in Montana 8 months earlier as a successful attorney with a growing practice and a plan to get rich by destroying families. He left as a broken man with nothing but the clothes on his back and a criminal investigation following him wherever he went. But Albert's most satisfying moment came in his final conversation with Cody, when they met to close the file on their operation. "They're both gone," Albert reported. "Sherry's facing criminal charges for child abuse, and will probably serve 18 months in state prison. Burke fled to Nevada, where he's working as a paralegal under an assumed name. Neither of them will ever be in a position to threaten Emma again, and the evidence has been turned over to the appropriate authorities. Your daughter will never have to testify in open court, but her recorded statements with Dr. Dominguez will ensure Sherry's conviction. Burke's disbarment is permanent, and his criminal exposure means he'll never practice law again. Cody nodded, feeling something like closure, but not quite satisfaction. What about collateral damage? Minimal. Burke's children will be better off without him in their lives. Sherry's family is horrified but supportive of Emma's recovery. Your business reputation has actually been enhanced by how you handled the crisis. People respect a man who protects his family. And the cost? Albert named a figure that would have been devastating to most people, but was manageable for someone with Cody's resources. Consider it an investment in your daughter's future security. As they shook hands and prepared to part ways, Albert offered one final piece of advice. Your enemies are destroyed, Cody. But the man who destroyed them isn't the same person who started this journey. Make sure Emma gets to know the father you're becoming, not just the father you used to be. That evening, Cody sat in Emma's room as she practiced violin, the same instrument she'd been playing the night her mother had revealed her true nature. The burns on Emma's arm had healed, leaving only faint scars that would fade with time. The psychological wounds would take longer, but Dr. Dominguez was confident that Emma would recover completely with proper support and love. Daddy, Emma said, setting down her violin. Is Mommy ever coming back? The question Cody had been dreading. Emma knew that Sherry was gone, that she was staying with friends while problems were worked out, but she didn't know the full truth of what her mother had done or why she would never return. No, sweetheart. Mommy made some very bad choices, and she has to face the consequences of those choices. But you and I are going to be fine. We're going to take care of each other. Emma nodded solemnly, her 8-year-old mind processing this information with the resilience that children often showed in the face of adult failures. Will you always protect me, Daddy? Always, Cody promised, pulling his daughter close. No matter what it takes, no matter what I have to do, I will always protect you. As Emma fell asleep in his arms, Cody reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He'd started as a successful businessman who believed in fairness and justice. He'd become something much darker and more dangerous, someone capable of systematic revenge and calculated destruction. The change had been necessary to protect Emma, but it was permanent. He would never again be the naive man who trusted his wife's perfect facade or believed that good intentions were enough to keep his family safe. Sherry and Burke had awakened something ruthless and unforgiving in him, and that aspect of his nature would never sleep again. Anyone who threatened Emma in the future would discover that her father had learned lessons in cruelty from masters of the art. But perhaps that was exactly what Emma needed. Not a perfect father, but a dangerous one. Someone who would never hesitate to become a monster if that's what protecting her required. The war was over. His enemies were destroyed. And Cody Douglas had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the only way to protect innocence was to sacrifice it within yourself. Chapter 9. The Price of Victory. 1 year later, Cody stood in the same music room where Emma had been practicing violin the night Sherry's mask had finally slipped. But everything else had changed. Emma was thriving under her father's sole custody, her natural resilience enhanced by regular sessions with Dr. Dominguez and the security of knowing she was truly safe. The scars on her arm had faded to thin white lines that would disappear completely with time, and the psychological scars were healing just as well. She'd started a new school where none of the staff knew about her mother's crimes, allowing her to build friendships without the shadow of public scandal. Her violin playing had improved dramatically, and she'd been accepted into the state youth orchestra, an achievement that filled Cody with pride unmarked by the bitter memories of her previous performances. Daddy, listen to this new piece, Emma called out, adjusting her violin under her chin. The melody that filled the room was complex and beautiful, played with a confidence and joy that had been absent during her mother's reign of subtle terror. Cody settled into his chair, the same one where he'd once listened while processing the cracks in his marriage. Now it was simply a place where he enjoyed his daughter's music, uncomplicated by hidden tensions or suppressed fears. As Emma played, Cody's mind wandered to the reports that Albert still sent him monthly. Not because there were ongoing threats. Sherry and Burke had been as thoroughly destroyed as promised, but because Cody had learned the value of comprehensive information about potential dangers to his family. Sherry had served 14 months in state prison for child abuse, her sentence reduced by a plea agreement that spared Emma from having to testify in open court. Upon release, she'd moved to Oregon, where she worked at a discount retail chain under her maiden name. Her former life of privilege and social prominence might as well have happened to someone else. The psychological evaluation required for her sentencing had revealed what Albert's team had suspected. Sherry was a narcissist with sociopathic tendencies who'd viewed Emma as an object rather than a person. The evaluating psychiatrist had recommended that she never be allowed unsupervised contact with children again. Burke's fate had been even more complete. His criminal trial for client fund misappropriation had resulted in a 5-year sentence, most of which he'd served in Nevada State Prison. Upon release, he'd found that his reputation had followed him everywhere, making it impossible to rebuild any kind of professional life. Last report had him working construction in Alaska, an irony that Cody found particularly satisfying. But the most important change was in Cody himself. The man who'd entered this conflict as a trusting husband and protective father had been forged into something harder and more dangerous. He'd learned to think like his enemies, to plan multiple steps ahead, to strike preemptively when threats emerged. His business had actually grown stronger during and after the crisis. Other wealthy men, hearing whispered stories about how thoroughly he'd destroyed those who'd threatened his family, had sought him out as a partner. They recognized in Cody someone who could be trusted completely as an ally and feared absolutely as an enemy. Mark Murphy had become more than just a friend. He was now Cody's partner in a private security consulting firm they'd established as a side business. Rich men with problem wives, executives facing blackmail, politicians dealing with threats to their families. They all found their way to the discreet offices where Cody and Mark offered the kind of solutions that couldn't be purchased through legal channels. Albert Crane had retired after the Douglas operation, claiming it represented the perfect culmination of his career. "I've spent 30 years destroying bad people," he told Cody at their final meeting. "But I never found a client who deserved victory more than you did." The team had scattered to other projects, but they remained available if Cody ever needed them again. Joyce had returned to her grandmother persona, though she occasionally consulted on operations requiring her particular skills. Rachel had started her own cybersecurity firm, specializing in protecting families from digital threats. Glenn had opened a private investigation agency that asked few questions about its clients' motivations. All of them understood that they'd been part of something special, the complete and justified destruction of predators who'd thought themselves untouchable. "How was that, Daddy?" Emma asked, lowering her violin as the complex piece came to an end. "Beautiful, sweetheart. Your best performance yet." Emma beamed with pride, her face showing none of the fear or uncertainty that had marked her expressions during her mother's presence. She was becoming the confident, joyful child she'd always been meant to be, free from the psychological terrorism that had constrained her development. "Mrs. Peterson says I might be ready for the Advanced Youth Orchestra next year," Emma said, carefully placing her violin in its case. "She says I have exceptional potential." She's absolutely right. You can accomplish anything you set your mind to. As Emma headed to the kitchen for her evening snack, Cody remained in the music room, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. He'd saved his daughter by becoming someone he'd never intended to be, someone capable of systematic revenge and calculated cruelty. The transformation had been necessary, but it was permanent. The naive trust that had once characterized his relationships was gone forever, replaced by constant vigilance and careful analysis of everyone who entered their lives. Emma's new teachers, friends' parents, even casual acquaintances were subjected to discreet background checks. Anyone who showed unusual interest in Emma or asked too many questions about their family found themselves under subtle surveillance until Cody was satisfied they posed no threat. Some might call it paranoia, but Cody called it learning from experience. He'd trusted his wife completely and nearly lost his daughter as a result. That mistake would never be repeated. His phone buzzed with a text message from Mark. "Potential client wants to meet tomorrow. Wife having affair with business partner, threatening to destroy him in divorce." "Interested?" Cody typed back. "Set it up." Another wealthy man whose trust had been betrayed, whose family was threatened by predators who thought themselves smarter than their victims. Another opportunity to apply the lessons Albert's team had taught him about the systematic destruction of enemies. The work was profitable, but more importantly, it was satisfying. Each successful operation was a reminder that justice existed for those willing to pursue it through unconventional means. "Daddy." Emma appeared in the doorway, holding a glass of milk and looking thoughtful. "Do you ever miss Mommy?" The question no longer surprised him. Emma asked it periodically, processing her complex feelings about the woman who'd given birth to her, but had ultimately proven to be a threat to her safety and happiness. "I miss the person I thought she was," Cody answered honestly. "But that person never really existed. Your mother was very good at pretending to be someone she wasn't. Like wearing a mask?" "Exactly like wearing a mask. And when the mask came off, we saw who she really was underneath." Emma nodded solemnly. At 9 years old, she'd learned lessons about human nature that most adults never fully grasped. The experience had made her more perceptive and cautious, but also more appreciative of genuine kindness and honesty. "I'm glad it's just us now," she said quietly. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." As Emma headed off to finish her homework, Cody walked to his study and unlocked the safe where he kept Albert's final report on the operation. The document was comprehensive and devastating, documenting every aspect of Sherry and Burke's destruction with the same methodical precision that had characterized their creation. At the end, Albert had included a personal note. "The measure of a man isn't whether he can avoid becoming dangerous. It's whether he can control that danger and direct it toward protecting what matters most. You've learned to be dangerous in service of good, which makes you far more valuable than men who are simply good, and far more moral than men who are simply dangerous." Cody closed the file and returned it to the safe, next to the other documents that chronicled his transformation from trusting businessman to someone much more formidable. Outside his window, the Montana landscape stretched toward the horizon, vast and unforgiving. Somewhere in that darkness, other predators were planning to destroy other families, confident in their superiority and certain of their victims' weakness. They had no idea that their potential victims might have allies like Cody Douglas, men who'd learned that sometimes the only way to protect innocence was to abandon it within yourself. The war for Emma's safety was over, won through the complete annihilation of his enemies. But Cody understood now that the war for protecting families from predators would never end. There would always be another Sherry, another Burke, another threat that needed to be eliminated with extreme prejudice. He was ready for them. He'd learned from masters of the art of destruction, and he'd become something his enemies had never expected, a loving father who was also a merciless predator. Emma was safe, his enemies were destroyed, and Cody Douglas had learned the most important lesson of all. Mercy was a luxury that could only be afforded after victory was complete and absolute. The price of that victory was the man he'd once been. But as Emma's laughter echoed through their home, free from fear for the first time in years, Cody knew it was a price worth paying. Some men were born to build. Others were born to destroy. The truly dangerous ones learned to do both with equal skill, choosing their targets with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a predator. Cody Douglas had become such a man, and his enemies would never see him coming until it was far too late to escape the trap. The story was over, but the legend was just beginning. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.